Okay, just past 1 o'clock Eastern. Let's go ahead and do this. Only got a handful of people here, but well, it's the holidays, whatever. Greetings, folks. Those couple of you in the chat room, and anyone else who's actually watching this later. So this is, I think, the 5th time I've actually done any sort of Redux streaming, and I've definitely like prior streams. I've definitely had an issue where I end up talking for like an hour straight, and then not a whole lot of time is left to actually get any work done. So I'm going to try to restrict myself to, only 20 or 30 minutes of talking today. Ha. We'll see about that. Okay. So, each of the prior streams that I've done has had a specific theme or goal. I did one where I was looking at reselect performance and TypeScript types, one where we dove into React Redux version 8 internals, another where we talked about the Redux Toolkit listener middleware, etc. And so the theme for today is Redux Toolkit 2.0. So I've got some notes here, and so I'm going to go through kind of a summary and overview of what we actually want to do for Redux Toolkit 2.0. We'll look at some of the open issues and stuff regarding that. And then I actually want to dive in and really do some real, actual development work on 2.0. A lot of that is going to be messing with build configuration stuff, which is, trust me, it's not exciting, but it's a key part of the kind of work we need to do, and it's part of actual maintainership stuff. So, the biggest goal for Redux Toolkit 2.0 is dropping legacy compatibility. Since we started the library, we have been backwards compiling our library source code to ES5 syntax for compatibility with IE11, and we want to drop that. It needs to go away. Similarly, we've got some polyfills in there for things like abort controller, because there are some environments where that doesn't exist. And so we want to strip those out so that overall that the bundle sizes that we're generating are smaller because we're using more modern syntax. We also have a few different breaking changes lined up. One that we've been talking about for a while is removing the object form of createReducer and the extraReducers field in createSlice. We added a deprecation warning to that in Redux Toolkit 1.9, and so it's time to start actually ripping that out. Very early on, we exported get default middleware as a public API, and then we deprecated it because there's no way for it to properly infer the TypeScript types. And so we switched over to having the middleware option in configure store be a callback function that is given get default middleware as an argument. And so that way we actually have the correct TypeScript types applied. So I know we slapped a deprecated tag on the standalone export a long time ago, and that needs to go away. And then one of the simultaneously smallest and biggest changes, and frankly something that I'm scared to death to start working on, is adding the exports module keyword in package.json so that you have full ES module support under Node. And I'm legitimately scared to work on this because I've seen so many horror stories of how messing with package exports definitions starts breaking everything. And there's so many different edge cases and scenarios and combinations of build tools that work with one approach and don't work with another. So I'm scared to mess with that. And if we have time, I'm going to try to start poking at that today. I don't expect to get very far, but we may give it a shot. Another thing that's on the list is trying to put out a Redux core package version 5. So currently, the public release is version 4.2.0, and that on that branch, all the code is still written in JavaScript, and we have a handwritten TypeScript typedefs file that is included in the package. And we actually converted the master branch over to TypeScript back in 2019, and it has never actually been published from those types. So if we're ever actually going to do that, doing that in combination with RTK 2.0 seems to make the most sense. And we may end up making a few additional tweaks to the TypeScript types. We'll see. Beyond that, there may also be some additional meaningful feature changes in RTK 2.0. Lens has been talking about adding some kind of concept or ability to actually combine slices together in some way, rather than just having the original Redux combine reducers method. He's also been tossing around some ideas for better selector support for slices in some way, and we may make some tweaks to the TypeScript types as well. Let's see. We got a couple more people showing up. Cool. So this is the general outline for 2.0. It's more about cleanup and simplifying things than it is actually trying to build a bunch of big new features. So the primary source for discussion on this is a RTK 2.0 issue that we've got over in the repo. Let's see. Side question from the chat room. Will there ever be a native interface for computed properties? Easy Peasy has it and is really nice. Let's go look at what that looks like for just a second for point of comparison. Let's see. Computed. So, for context for folks, so there's a few different libraries that are full-on abstraction layers over Redux. Easy Peasy is one of them. Kia and Rematch are ones that I've seen. All of them use the Redux core internally, but they wrap it so much that you really don't even see that you're using Redux inside anymore. And so in this case, I think what this is more or less doing is creating a selector internally, but it's doing it in a way that is kind of built into their equivalent of a create slice definition. The actual question is, will we ever have a way to define this, something like this built into Redux Toolkit? Half the answer is no, and half the answer is maybe. So probably nothing exactly like this. But if you look at this thread right here, let's see. Where was one? Okay. Len's put up an issue recently where he had some ideas for making slices more of a first-class citizen within Redux Toolkit. And I think some of that maybe had some improvement for being able to define selectors inside of a slice or something along those lines. At the moment, this is still just a very notional kind of hand wavy idea. There's no real concrete code for this at the moment yet. But maybe we could have something sort of similar to the get selectors method that is built into create entity adapter in some way. where you say, okay, I know this is where the reducer is going to get added to the Redux store, and you define some selectors inside of the slice. And then if you call get selectors, it gives you back versions of those selectors that actually know where to find the slice state in some way. So yeah, the hand wavy answer is maybe, sorta, but probably not like exactly the way Easy Peasy does it. Let's see. So if you look at this RTK 2.0 thread, let's see, I actually filed it a year and a half ago. And let's see, what were my notes in here? Some of the discussion at the time was around the build system. And we had just switched over to using an ES build powered approach that someone had contributed. And let's see, what else was the discussion here? Yeah, I had a couple references to the ESM support. And I've occasionally been tossing up Twitter threads asking, "Hey, what would you like to see in a notional Redux Toolkit 2.0?" Anything else relevant here? A couple debates about some RTK query internals. So this thread is, the main area where we've been discussing ideas for RTK. Over on the Redux core side, so I mentioned this a couple minutes ago, we actually converted the master branch of the Redux core repo to TypeScript back in the summer of 2019. Several community members contributed that work. And it's been sitting there, and we still have not published a package, an official release from any of those changes on that branch. So if you were to compare what's in, what's on our master branch right now versus what's on the 4.x branch, so the 4.x branch, the one that's actually the live version of the package that's published at the moment, is still the original JavaScript, and the master branch is the TypeScript conversion. And there's been a couple different reasons why we haven't published this. One is that the current Redux 4.x package still works fine. It does, we do ship it with handwritten TypeScript types included, and that's been sufficient. Another is that we've been talking about, like, do the types in this master branch actually have any breaking changes? Like, is this going to cause problems for anyone if we ship this? And also, should we make any other changes to these types while we're at it? So there's actually another issue that's almost a year old that it's like, okay, do the types work as expected? And should we make any further changes to them? And there actually are a few other open issues, mostly filed by, one or two of them filed by the maintainer of the Redux DevTools extension, actually, around things like replace reducer and store enhancers, with some tweaks that he would like us to make. And so these may be things that we need to evaluate and look at and try and finalize. So my thought process is that I really would like to ship a Redux version 5. I'm slightly concerned about, would this have any ripple effect changes on the ecosystem, which is really why we haven't tried to publish it before now. But if we're going to publish Redux version 5, it makes sense to do that as part of the work on Redux Toolkit 2.0, because RTK depends on the Redux core. So if we ship RTK 2.0 and it depends on Redux core version 5, then everybody gets it, and hopefully things just work. So these are some of the notional plans for what we want to do. I shipped RTK 1.9 in early November, and I've kind of very intentionally been taking the last month or so plus off of doing real maintainer work. Like I had one evening where I applied some bug fix PRs and shipped 1.9.1, but really haven't done any actual maintainer stuff since then. So one of my goals for the break has been to actually do a couple things. I put up a new docs page on Redux side effects approaches a couple days ago. I would like to start working on adding a new page to the essentials tutorial that says, okay, we've built this example app. You've seen how to use Redux Toolkit. Now let's talk about how to do all that in TypeScript. So I may start working on that over this weekend. But the other big thing on the plate for the foreseeable future is Redux Toolkit 2.0. So, with all those things in mind, let's see, I've only been babbling for 20 minutes. That's less than usual. Cool. Let's see if I can turn this into an actual semi-productive session and start legitimately getting stuff done. Okay, let's see, we've got 12, 15-ish people here. Okay, cool. So a few weeks ago, I did actually start playing around with a couple initial sets of changes for our build setup. So let me actually pick up with that branch. Start doing something here. So and I did a first couple initial steps a couple weeks ago. Let's see, refresh. Okay. So the first thing that I did was I switched over to trying to remove all of the ES5 compatible output from our build step and trying to target modern browsers instead. Let's see. Side question. Are there any new TypeScript features coming along that might improve typings for the Redux ecosystem? I don't know for sure. I know that TypeScript, I think 4.9 has this new syntax feature called satisfies. Not sure what else is coming down the pipe over in the TypeScript compiler itself. That's probably a better answer for my co-maintainer Lens Webertronic. Frankly, he's much better at TypeScript than I am. So he would be the person to ask if there's anything we can actually improve. It's certainly possible we can do some cleanup on the existing types because we no longer care about having them work with like TypeScript version 3 dot something. So maybe. Another question is, will there ever be automated handling of dates, like some kind of middleware that can serialize and deserialize? No, I don't think that's anything we would ever intentionally try to add ourselves. It's always something you could add yourself, but that's not a use case that we consider critical to try and work on ourselves. Okay, so let me see if I can put up a bit of a comparison between what the current build output looks like versus what it looks like after the initial changes I tried making in a couple weeks ago. So if I switch back to the master branch and I run a build from there, actually, let's make sure we actually have all the dependencies correct because we got to switch back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and make a local build of Redux Toolkit 1 off of master, which still has all the ES5 compatible syntax stuff coming in there. And then I'm going to switch over to the branch where I had made the initial couple configuration changes and make another build. And I'm going to diff the two folders so you can see the impact of those changes. So the current the existing build process spits out like a couple dozen different bundled build artifacts, and it's a whole matrix of different module formats, different file contents. In fact, let's actually go look at that for a second. So this is a custom build setup that was initially contributed by a user about 1.5 to 2 years ago. And it's powered by a mixture of ES-Build and TypeScript. And ES-Build does the primary bundling. And then the issue is because we need to be able to backwards compile to ES5 syntax for compatibility with IE11, ES-Build doesn't do that because it just tries to target modern environments. So it actually does an additional step where it takes the bundles that need to be that still have modern syntax inside, and it runs those through TypeScript to get the lowering to ES5. So what you can see here is that currently we generate files that have a number of different module formats. So CommonJS, ES modules, and UMD modules. And they have a mixture of, is it a development build? Is it a production build? Does it still reference environment variables like process.env.nodenv, which is used to surround development only checks and needs to be removed in production builds? And so we've got like 8 or 10 different bundles that are getting generated for each of our different entry points. And we have the primary entry point, we have the RTK query core entry point that doesn't know anything about React, and then we've got the RTK query with React entry point. And so you can see here, we're generating like, 24, 30 different output bundle files every time we do a build. So let's see. Toolkit. Okay, so we're going to save a copy of that. Make sure we still got all those. Oh, whoops. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot. I need to switch over to the desktop view. None of you saw me actually mess. I apologize. I was messing around with stuff here on the screen the last few minutes, and none of you got to see that. Oops. Yeah, that was not terribly helpful, was it? Okay, so yeah, I did a build a minute ago, and you can see a whole bunch of different build artifacts got generated. And the code that manages this is down under packages, toolkit, scripts, build.ts. And we've got all these, we've got just an array of different definitions for all the different combinations. So CommonJS file, development build, CommonJS file, production build, ES modules targeting modern syntax, ES modules targeting older syntax, etc. And let me actually switch back for a second. Yeah, so on master, you'll see, like I've got output here for ES modules that ends up getting compiled to ES5 syntax, ES modules that ends up getting compiled to modern syntax, etc. And the result is that it generates like 24 some different output bundles. So I just ran that build off of master. And now let's run another build off of the 2.0 initial work branch. And the changes that I'd made here were I removed the bundle output that was ES module syntax with ES5 compilation target inside. And I bumped up all the rest of these to target ES 2018. And then I think I tweaked the name on one of these, maybe. Nope, apparently not. And then I also updated our package scripts so that they actually reference the modern build as the default for the current bundler module exports setup. Okay, so let's see what the difference is between these two different folders based on the changes that I've made so far. Okay, so if you look at this, the CommonJS development build shrank by about 18K just by changing the build output from a target from ES5 to ES 2018. And that's because, it's the bundlers, like ES build are no longer having to generate a whole or ES build and TypeScript are no longer having to generate a whole bunch of like helper functions. They're not having to convert arrow functions into the function keyword. They're not having to convert. They're not having to convert awaits into promises and generators. So just changing the build output to a more modern syntax shrinks these files pretty considerably. Looks like the final minified size change is more on the lines of about 8K or so. So, not as impressive, but hey, that's, minus 8K bundle size for free. Question from chat. To support all these platforms, is it just config files, or is there anything you need to be doing in the code as well? So this change here was almost entirely the configuration files. If you look at this one commit that I made locally a couple weeks ago, it was primarily just changing the definitions of which bundle formats am I trying to output and what version of the JavaScript language spec am I targeting as the output, and then no longer trying to run them through the TypeScript backwards compilation step. So that really was just changing some basic build configuration. Now, the other thing that I'd also changed a couple weeks ago, we started using Immer internally in Redux Toolkit from the very first proof of concepts. And early on, Immer automatically had a backwards compatibility fallback because Immer normally uses proxies to wrap your data and track the attempted mutations. And proxies came out in the ES 2015 spec of the language. And so, it's taken a while for browsers and runtime environments to fully support those. IE 11 does not support proxies. React Native's Hermes JavaScript runtime did not support proxies for many years. And so there were still a number of cases where Immer needed to run in environments that did not have proxies. And the way Immer handled it is that it automatically had a fallback to where if proxies were not available, it would define properties on objects instead. And starting around, I think, Immer version 5 or something like that, they changed it so that Immer uses proxies by default, and the ES5 support was now a plugin that you explicitly had to call and turn on. And if you didn't need that, it would drop another, kilobyte or two from the bundle size. Because we switched to that newer version of Immer in a minor version of Redux Toolkit, we had to actually turn on that plugin by default in order to maintain Redux Toolkit's compatibility and not inadvertently break any of our users who were still using RTK in an older browser environment. So because we have to do that in the entry point file, everybody who's using Redux Toolkit has had to pay the couple kilobyte cost of Immer's ES5 support, even if they don't even use createSlice or createReducer. Now, in practice, we expect that everyone is using those, but the point is that this has been an extra couple kilobytes we've been shipping in order to maintain backwards compatibility without breaking any of our users. And it's something we want to go away now that we are doing a major version and can do breaking changes. So the other change that I made here was I removed that Immer ES5 plugin. You can see it's just, deleting the one line of the import and the one line of usage. So let's see. Do I have a good example of Problem is I've got like dozens of little example files or example projects sitting around here, and I'm not sure which one I should be using off the top of my head. Let's see. Let's see. Do I have a good project that works for size tests already? You know what? Let's use the Vite one. And I have no idea what that project even contains at the moment. Let's find out. So what I want to do is I want to install the current version of RTK in this project, build it, see what the bundle size is, and then I want to switch over to the branch build that I just did, try using that, and see what the size is as a point of comparison. So let's see, what is this using? This is using okay, let's change this to 1.9.1. And what does the app have in it? Okay, it's got a counter. Okay, I think this ought to work. Oh, it's using a... Apparently the last time I used this project, I was using it to experiment with some local builds of React Redux. Okay, so let's change that over to... Actually, we don't even need that. Okay, that looks better. Apparently this is also using an older version of Vite. Okay, so using Redux Toolkit 1.9, the vendor bundle clocks in at 165K. All right. So if I come back here, I spend a fair amount of time working on versions of the package in local development. And I often want to try these out in a test project like I'm about to do now. And I could, in theory, actually do a true publish of the package to NPM to try it out, but that would be awfully silly. Another way to do this would be to use npm or yarn and run their link command, which tries to connect a symlink folder to the application project that you're working on. But I've always had lots of issues because then you run into like the infamous, React is being loaded twice in your project error message or something like that. So what I normally use is a tool called Yelk. And Yelk is a very, very neat tool that does an actual build and publish step of the package that you're working on, but it publishes it to a local folder. So then you go over to the application project and you say, "Hey, Yelk, install the local published copy of this library into the application project," and you can actually use the locally published build as if it had been a real npm publish. So it's much more authentic and actually matches the real installation behavior, whereas npm link tends to end up with weird results. So no, I don't use yarn or npm link because I've seen too many problems with those. So let's do a Yelk publish, and it's going to run all the same build and publish steps that it would if I were really publishing this to npm. So we'll sit and twiddle our thumbs here for a minute. One thing I'm also kind of wondering about is whether it's still worth actually including UMD format module bundles in the output. For those who are not familiar, UMD is a multi-format module setup where a file can simultaneously be used as a plain script tag, an AMD module, or a common JS module. And they often are like I think CodePen has been the use case for a lot of UMD modules and JavaScript libraries over the last few years because people have needed to add things as script tags. I think CodePen might have added support for NPM packages at some point, but I'm not 100% sure. Okay, so I did the local publish of the package with Yelk. So I'm going to come over here to the example application folder, and I tell Yelk, go ahead and add this. And what that does is it replaces the version string here to point to a file definition. And so if I rerun yarn, yarn is going to copy the file and stuff into node modules. And we can confirm that by now coming in here into node modules and looking at package.json. Actually, that's not helpful because I didn't pump the version. If we look at the dist folder, we should see. Actually, you know what? I know what we can look at. We can look at, yeah, there's the line that I changed in the bundler configuration. So this is the local build, even though I didn't change the version string. So let's try rerunning yarn build, and let's see how much of a change we get out of this. Well, it's a change. I was perhaps hoping for something slightly more dramatic there. So previously it said 165K, and there it said 160K. Well, it's a change. I was hoping for a somewhat different, better improvement, but I would guess that the bulk of that is actually React itself. Out of curiosity, do I? I do have the analyze thing set up. Let's do that actually. Let me revert back to 1.9 and rebuild it. And I'm going to show you a nifty little tool to actually inspect the contents of bundle sizes here. let's see, side question. Is it possible to step into functions inside locally published packages during debugging in a browser? Yes, because the point of using something like Yalk is that it actually truly installs a copy of the locally published package into the application project. So when I did that build a minute ago with the local copy of RTK, the bundle itself included all the code from that local copy, that local publish of RTK. So if I were to run that and look at it in the browser, I would really be looking at the code from my local publish instead. Okay, so there's a bunch of different tools that you can use to analyze bundle sizes, and one of them is called Source Map Explorer. So let's open up the, this is the bundle output from using Redux Toolkit 1.9. And so this gives us a visual representation of the size of, what's taking up space inside the bundle. And so, yeah, we can see that by far the biggest piece here is, in fact, React itself. After that, we've got Immer, RTK, React Core, React Redux, Scheduler, which is part of React, and then a few other things. And then the actual application is pretty small because it's just a tiny counter example app. Okay, so if we do a switcheroo, and we run that again, looking at how things are with the build I just made. Okay, so we can see the actual size improvement here. So if we look at the Explorer view with the current Redux Toolkit 1.9, we can see that we're pulling in almost 10K worth of Immer and about 8.4K worth of Redux Toolkit. And if we look at the build that I made locally, we're pulling in 8.1K worth of Immer and only 4.7K worth of Redux Toolkit. And you know what? I think this actually makes sense because the only pieces of Redux Toolkit that we're using in this example application are configure store and create slice. There's all the other pieces, create entity adapter, RTK query, all that other stuff. But this example application isn't using those. So we're only pulling in part of Redux Toolkit to begin with. Therefore, it makes sense that the net savings are smaller because we're using a smaller portion of RTK in the bundle. So this is a good sign. This says that we actually have some improvement just from making these two changes of changing the build output to not target ES5, making sure we're using a more modern bundle as the default for most bundlers, and removing the Immer ES5 plugin from the default configuration. So, hey, a few kilobytes less automatic by default. That's a good first step. Okay, so that part looks good. And I think I had actually tried doing a couple of these size checks a couple weeks ago when I was playing around with this. So given that, might as well put up a pull request with these couple changes here. And along with that, I'm going to set up a RTK 2.0 integration branch. We've tended to have very, very long running integration branches for some of our sizable releases because frankly, it's taken us months to get some of those releases done. I think we started working on RTK 1.9 in I don't know, May or June. And we didn't actually ship it until early November. So that was like 5 months that some of those changes were sitting around. So we've normally kept an integration branch as an open PR so that it automatically does the builds and people can try using the automatic code sandbox publish versions of the library if they want to try them out. So let's go ahead and create one of those now. And this is probably going to be around for a very, very long time. So all right, so created that, and let's push it. Hello, where'd you go? There we go. Source tree took a minute to actually update there. Okay, so we'll push that. And we'll push the initial changes here. Target the 2.0 branch. Okay, so we'll kick that off and let that go for a couple minutes. And I would hope that doesn't break any of our tests, but you never know. That's why we have tests. Okay, so we'll let that sit for a couple minutes. Let's see. You know, now that I think about it, I think I actually published. I think I did actually publish a Redux Core 5 alpha. Yes, I did. Oh, Tim published it like a year ago. Okay. Okay. Um, there probably are some changes on the 4.x branch that aren't reflected in the master of version 5. One is that earlier this year, I marked the original Redux create store method as deprecated, specifically because we want people to actually use Redux Toolkit and configure store instead. I don't think I ever got around to making those same changes on master, so I probably have to do that at some point. And then, not actually Redux 5 related, but there is. Let's see, where are you? There's an open issue someone filed about a month ago where apparently Redux is crashing in an Expo React Native build setup. And it has to do with this weird little compatibility check function that's been in Redux since like the first couple months of its existence. And I think we concluded in this discussion that we don't need that check anymore. And the user had filed a PR to remove that, and I haven't actually applied or done anything with that yet. So that's something I probably ought to put in and release as Redux 4.2.1, but then that also needs to go into the master branch as well so that they're up to date. Question from the side: do tests include running in the browsers or only Node? Just Node. That said, we do have a pretty good matrix of different setups that we use for the tests. So we test our TypeScript types against a range of different versions of TypeScript to make sure that, as long as you're using a relatively recent version of TypeScript, all of RTK's types will work correctly. Interestingly enough, for running the actual unit tests, what we do is we actually build the RTK package, self-install it locally, and then we run the tests against, well, at least in the NCI, we run them against the installed version of the RTK package. So that at least does a little better job of representing this is how it all behaves after it's gone through the publishing step. For local development, we do run the tests, just with like Jest or something in the local environment. Okay, how are things looking over here? We are still going. Okay, our wait goes a little faster than that. It took longer to install dependencies because there were some changes. Tell you what, since this is building for a couple minutes, I'm going to stand up and stretch and be back shortly. And then we'll see if we can actually start working on some package exports definition stuff, or at least doing some investigation and see just how complicated and stupid this effort's going to be. Okay, let's see. So all the TypeScript types and type checks passed, both the test checks passed. So that looks good. And we're targeting the new 2.0 integration branch. So we'll merge that. And now that we've got some changes in that branch, let's go ahead. There we go. Let's go ahead and create the ongoing integration branch, which is probably going to be alive for months. So let's see. What did we even call the 1.9 branch? Let's be consistent here. Okay, yeah, just want X integration branch. Okay, we can do that. Okay, so yeah, we'll be using this branch for months as we work on each of the individual pieces that we pull together. And the nice thing is that we have the Redux Toolkit repo set up with Code Sandbox CI. So every time there's a push to this branch, it's actually going to kick off a Code Sandbox CI build that will create a publishable version of the actual current changes in the branch. And then you can actually use yarn or npm to install this build off of Code Sandbox CI, even if we haven't officially published it to npm. Having said that, tell you what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make one more change, and I'm going to have this Redux Toolkit 2.0 branch depend on Redux 5 Alpha. And then I'm going to publish RTK 2.0 Alpha 0 so that there is actually an official release just in case anyone wants to try this out. So let's just go ahead and do that right now. Let's see. The hard part is going to be remembering that all these new 2.0 feature branches that I make need to go off the integration branch instead. Actually, on top of that, I almost screwed up because I made my local integration branch doesn't have the merge that I just made. Oops. Let's do that. Okay, now we've got a branch that has that. So let's go over to package.json. Dependencies, where are you? Oh, wrong one, that's the root. Okay, so currently Redux Toolkit is defined as depending on Redux Core version 5. So let's change that to 5.0.0-alpha.0. And let's actually see what happened. Yeah, let's see what happens if I do another Yelp publish. Actually, that's a good question. I'm gonna try doing another Yelp publish with this. I'm gonna go back to the example app that I was playing with a minute ago, and I'm going to install the local build of RTK, and I'm going to make sure we have Redux 5 Alpha installed, and let's just see if that builds okay. So we'll do another Yelp publish. And it reruns through the entire build process again. Let's see. Someone in the chat is saying hi. Greetings to you. Okay, so we've got that published. So I will rerun the Yalk add command over here in the example project, and we will rerun yarn. And I'm actually curious to see what's going to happen here. This does not list a Redux dependency by itself. But on the other hand, React Redux might because it needs the TypeScript types. So I'm curious, do we end up with two different copies of Redux installed? Nope, just one. Cool. Okay. So let's see what happens if we try compiling this again. Okay. The example app is okay. let me back up and explain because I've got like a bunch of thoughts in my head and I should probably verbalize them. So when I published Redux 4.2.0 a few months ago, I marked the original create store method as with the @deprecated flag, which does not change behavior. It just adds a visual strike through in the editor. And as one workaround for that, I added an alias for the function called legacy_createStore, which is the exact same function, just without the deprecated attribute. I did that on the 4.x branch in the Redux repository, but I have not done that on the master branch yet. And since, on top of that, since Redux 5 alpha was published a year ago, and I just made the create store change back in like April, version 5 alpha does not have this method, and therefore this example app, which was trying to reference it, exploded. So we'll fix that. Actually, interestingly, am I not even using configure store here? I'm not. Okay, let's do that. Just to check, we are actually using createSlice over here, right? Yes. Okay. Let's see. Interesting. Okay, so apparently the example app that I was using earlier truly was not even using configure store. I had it really stripped down to just using createSlice. So adding createSlice increases the bundle size a little bit. But the important thing is that it actually did compile correctly. And if we serve the dist folder, something's not working. Oh, that's interesting. That's not what I was hoping to see. This very, very small example app is exploding. Why are we exploding? Oh, we're okay. We're exploding because the example app is I screwed up as I was defining the setup for the application. Why did we do that? So the counter slice. What did I have defined in here? Oh, on top of that, okay, hang on. Checking things here. This is the problem. This is the problem I get for having like a dozen different example applications that I've been messing around with in different scenarios, and then trying to reuse one as a playground. Let's see. So this is expecting. Oh, I have two different Redux stores defined. That's why. Okay, we want to ignore that, I think. Apparently, at some point, I've been using this project as an example for trying to play around with some other size-related checks, and that's what's messing things up. So let's rebuild this. In case you can't tell, by the way, there's an awful lot of making this stuff up on the fly, both in the sense of me trying to show things off while streaming, and in terms of me doing like actual maintainer work. So if any of you are under the impression that like I'm really truly like I really truly know what I'm doing, sorta. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, that looks better. Okay, cool. So what have we just proven? We've proven that the RTK 2.0 test build at least loads in the application correctly with the bundle, at least inside of Vite. We've proven that the Redux 5 alpha build, which is off the master branch, runs, and the TypeScript types are close enough to the existing 4.x types that nothing immediately broke in compilation in this one very, very, very tiny example application. So that does not say that the types are perfect, but at least says we didn't obviously break things. So that's good. Okay. You know what? Is it really even worth having a separate branch for this? You know what? Not really. This is a fresh integration branch. There's no point in a PR. I'm just going to push that chain straight over. So if I rerun yarn, is that going to affect anything else? It did affect things very slightly. Okay, yeah. So rerunning yarn was good because that did affect the resolution of other things. Okay, so we're gonna push that upwards. Actually, you know what? I'm not even gonna bother pushing right away. I'm gonna go ahead and actually publish Redux Toolkit 2.0 Alpha 0 right now. And this has the additional little side benefit of you get to see what I normally do when I publish stuff. So for the actual publishing step, I originally used a command line utility from Sindre Sorhus called NP, and we started having problems with that after we switched the Redux Toolkit repository over to be a mono repo. So I have since switched over to using release it. And this is pretty handy. It like the idea is it automates the process of bump the package version, run the build step, commit things, do the actual published step to npm, apply the tag, push the tag, etc. So, I mean, it's things that you could do by hand, but why should I have to remember all those steps? I know that some libraries have gone and actually, like fully automated releases by, doing things in CI, or, like to where like you push a tag and CI recognizes that there's a new tag and automatically does a release. We've just never gotten around to setting any of those up. So in that sense, I do releases semi-manually from my own machine, but using release it to automate the individual publishing steps. So let's go ahead and do that. It'll take a second to figure things out. Okay, so other, please specify 2.0.0 dash alpha.0. And I'm going to have to get my authentication stuff ready. Published npm. So it's now doing that, rerunning that actual build step in the back. Drat, what just broke? You know what? I don't feel like trying to debug that on stream. So maybe I'm not going to publish the alpha right now. Never mind. I'll investigate that one later on. That's annoying. I was wanting to actually put that out. All right, scratch those. Never mind. But I will. So in that case, I will at least push. I'll at least push the change that I made to list Redux 5 alpha as a dependency so that the code sandbox build kicks off. Okay. So thus far, we haven't actually done any like real serious work. It's just been kind of picking up where I left off with playing around with the build settings a few weeks ago and then attempting to publish an alpha. So if we look at the list of changes that we want to make over here, let's see. Question from the side. What's the name of the app that you're using for doing Git stuff? This is SourceTree. So you'll notice I do a mixture of command line and graphical operations. And like I go back and forth. I end up creating most of my branches from the command line, and I'll push some of the branches for the command line. And most rebase operations I do from the command line. But in terms of looking at the history and doing interactive rebases and stuff like that, I normally use a GUI for a lot of things. So SourceTree has been my preferred Git client for years. And in fact, if you go over to my blog, I actually have a post there, an extensive post, shockingly, that talks about using Git. And one of the points I made in there is that I am a very strong believer in using both a GUI and command line tools for Git operations, depending on what I'm doing. So SourceTree is good. I recommend it. There's a lot of other good graphical clients out there as well. Okay. So there's a bunch. So I'm planning to keep going for about another 40 minutes or so. And I would like to try to make some actual real meaningful progress on at least one of these tasks in the remaining time. I was considering looking at this one, but honestly, I think this one's going to be so complicated that it's going to take me hours of rereading some of the articles I've bookmarked just to get going on that. So, in the interest of actually doing something that looks like real progress live on stream, let's see if we can rip out some more deprecated code and see what happens. Let's do it. Yeah. Okay. So what does this even look like real fast? So if you look at the Redux Toolkit docs, when we originally built the createReducer API, which is one of the first pieces in Redux Toolkit, if you go, in fact, you know what? If you go all the way back to the original Redux docs, and I promise I'm actually going to start making code changes here in a minute, but I, of course, have to explain the context first. If you look at these docs, one of the earliest Redux documentation pages was this reducing boilerplate page. And it talks about, okay, like people don't like switch statements. We can make a function where you pass in an object, and the keys in the object are Redux action type strings, and it does a lookup to see, okay, here's the action being dispatched. Does the action type string exist as a key? If so, use the reducer function at that key. And so we built one of those functions for Redux Toolkit, and we called it createReducer. And so, again, the keys are type strings, and the values are reducer functions. And because this is Redux Toolkit and we use Immer inside, you can do all the mutation stuff. And later on, when we built createSlice, the first syntax that we added for the extraReducers field also was an object. And we had made the Redux Toolkit action creators so that they're toString function, which gets called implicitly if you pass the action creator in a computed key location, return the type string. And so you could use the action creator functions as the keys in this object. But what we found is that this does not work well with TypeScript. TypeScript does not realize that this action creator function gets implicitly stringified. And so this would throw an error at the TypeScript level. So later on, we added a new form of extraReducers where you pass in a callback, and we have this kind of like a Java-style chained builder API. And we found that this works much, much better with TypeScript. And it's only a few characters more when you're done writing it. So better type safety, not really much additional verbosity. And so in Redux Toolkit 1.9, we deprecated the object syntax for both createSlice.extraReducers and createReducer. And we actually put out some code mods that will look through files in your project and automatically convert them to the builder syntax. So in 1.9, there is code that will print out a one-time per use deprecation warning for both createReducer and createSlice if it sees the object syntax. So let's try ripping this out and see what happens. Question from the side: why have reducers and extraReducers? So the answer is that these are two different things. One of the points of createSlice is that it automatically generates the action creators and the action types for every function inside the reducers object. In other words, like most actions are very closely associated with one reducer. And so we've tried to simplify the default simplest thing you can do, and createSlice tries to handle that for you automatically. But there are times when you want to listen for an action in many different reducers. A common example of this would be when the user logs out, I want to clear the data from several different slices in the reducers. So the extraReducers field says we're going to listen to actions that were defined outside of this slice and still be able to update the state. Conceptually, this is kind of like adding more case statements to a switch statement. But the difference is reducers is going to define new action types, and extra-reducers is just for listening to action types that were already defined somewhere else, whether it be from createAsyncThunk or from another slice file. Okay, so let's see what we can rip out here. So if we've got the createReducer file, we've got a bunch of different TypeScript types in here. And it's been a while since I've looked at this. Okay, so we've got one overload that accepts the builder callback. And we've got another overload that accepts this case reducers object. And so here, this case reducers type represents passing in an object full of reducer functions. So I believe what we want to do is, number one, we want to remove this TypeScript overload. And you'll notice that this is just a type definition here. This is not the runtime code. So we're saying publicly, one way to call this is with the callback syntax. Another way to call this is with the case reducer syntax. And then the actual runtime implementation says, well, it could be either of those. Let's have logic to handle both cases. So we are going to remove this entire definition. And we're going to remove that possible union type there. And then at this point, now that I've removed those TypeScript overloads, by now, this variable can only be a function. And we can also remove the runtime warning. That can go... Actually, here's an interesting question. So in Redux Toolkit 1.9, we have the deprecation warning. But this is going to be Redux Toolkit 2.0. I'm wondering if it's worth leaving in this check and actually throwing an error in the 2.0 release, specifically because people might have upgraded to 2.0 and never seen the deprecation warning. So maybe it's better to change this to throwing an error. Yeah, let's do that. I think I did something similar in React Redux in a couple versions where it would look for options that had been removed and it would throw an error if you tried to pass in that option. So let's make this throwing an error instead. And then at this point, we know that since you can no longer pass in an object, this check is useless. So we can always treat this as handling the builder callback. And then, let's see, we can remove this case reducers type, which is deprecated. And that's probably, and that's gonna carry right into createSlice because it's referring to the same type. So let's go ahead and start updating this file as well. So we have the slice definition, createSlice options. Let's remove the case reducers option there. And if we come down here to, okay, so here's the place where createSlice is doing the same kind of thing, and it's checking to see if it's an object, and it's currently printing a warning. We'll make that throwing an error instead. And then similarly, we can do, what are we doing here? This is optional. It might not exist. So I probably actually want to leave this the same. It's interesting jumping back into the guts of library code you haven't looked at in a while. Like I was the one who did come in here and add the runtime warning deprecations a few months ago. But actually trying to come in here and look at the logic live while I'm streaming and haven't looked at it in depth in a while is interesting. Ah, yes, very good point. I should actually change the messages. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I wonder how long it would have taken me to notice that if someone hadn't just said that in the chat. Probably not today, that's for sure. Okay, I think this code will continue to work correctly as is, even though we no longer have the object form being passed in. So by the time we get here, it could be undefined. If it's defined, we'll execute the callback logic. If it's undefined, actually, let's just be very, let's do that. So we should fall, and so it'll be undefined. We use default syntax to fall back to an empty object. There are no matchers. There is no default case reducer. And then we've copied over all those. Okay, so I think those are the only necessary runtime changes to remove the object syntax. Where this is going to get interesting now is I guarantee you I have just broken a lot of our runtime tests and our TypeScript tests. And actually, what? Okay, that was weird. Okay, that is exactly what I expected. So I just tried running the test file for createReducer, and it didn't even get to the running part because we do try to compile the tests and before executing them, and I just ripped out the TypeScript types, and so the TypeScript types no longer say you can even pass in an object, and so that exploded. So let's go fix up some tests. And by fix, I mean deleting a bunch of code. Look at all those lovely red squiggles. Okay. This is going to be interesting. So the existing logic is using the object syntax. It's using the object syntax in a lot of places. A lot of places. Okay, fine. Let's see. What are you whining about? Oh, that's interesting. Comment from chat. I happily consume types and often forget the hours and weeks it took just so I could get that red squiggly line. Yeah, you have. I don't think folks realize how many hundreds, probably maybe even thousands of hours that we've put into the TypeScript definitions for Redux, Redux Toolkit, React Redux, Reselect. It's a ton of effort. In fact, okay. Side note: this has nothing to do with Redux Toolkit at all. But let me show you the monstrosity of a TypeScript type that I came up with last year. So in Reselect, you can pass in multiple input functions to a selector. Each of those is going to get called with the same arguments, like the Redux root state, maybe some ID. And the final generated selector function needs to accept, it needs to have correct TypeScript types so that it knows what the arguments to itself can be. And last year, I had to go, like Reselect's old TypeScript types were what, like 3,300 lines long. And it's because it was dozens and dozens of overloads for one argument, two arguments, three arguments, four arguments. And it was just like utterly disgusting and completely unmaintainable. So last year, somebody else contributed a better set of type definitions to Reselect that try to infer the types of all the input functions and extract the types of all the arguments. And I did the work to integrate that PR and I put out Reselect 4.1. But then people started having, various edge cases that weren't working right. And over the next several weeks in October and November last year, I kept having to tweak these type definitions and they became more and more complicated in order to handle all the possible inference edge cases. And what I ended up with was like this, like, well, including all the comments, 40 some line type definition that is just an absolute monstrosity. But it worked. Well, unfortunately, TypeScript 4.9 broke one library in the ecosystem, and it was this library and it was this type. And the TypeScript folks warned us about this, and I explained what this type was trying to do. And the creator of TypeScript himself, Anders Hellsberg, gave me a different type definition that accomplished the same thing, and it's actually simpler. And then the problem is, okay, this type only works with TypeScript 4.7 and above, but we're still trying to support people backwards through TypeScript 4.2. How can we ship both the old and the new version of this type at the same time? And there's a really stupid hack we had used previously on Redux Toolkit that does some build time shuffling of files to make this work. So we've got the older version of this type definition, and we've got the newer version of the type definition, and we ship a file that tells TypeScript, hey, if you're TypeScript 4.6 and earlier, use this one. If you're TypeScript 4.7 and later, use this one. And so I think I published this as Reselect 4.1.7. The point, there's 2 points I'm making out of this. One is that managing the type definitions is really, really hard. And we put a lot of effort into making this work. And also, frankly, there's a lot of this stuff that is like basically over my head, and I'm just barely managing to get enough stuff done to make this work. Okay, so back over here. What's the actual error that we're getting? So it says argument of type string is not assignable to parameter of typed action creator because it thinks that our action should have a payload field and it doesn't. Interesting. So action.payload is it's sort of a community standard that was invented before we came up with Redux Toolkit. And we settled on it because it makes for some nice consistency, and you can make some good assumptions in the logic about how the action object is going to be structured. And apparently our TypeScript types are set up to assume that when we're using this builder syntax, it will always have an action.payload field. And something about the way I just changed this is breaking that assumption. So let's see. How is this reducer being defined? Interesting. So that says it's payload action. And that says it should be payload. Right. Actually, hang on. Okay, so two different issues. Typed action creator string reducer. Okay, so it can't. Add case has two different overloads. One is that you can pass in a plain string, just a literal string, and the other is that you pass in a Redux Toolkit action creator function, and then it knows, okay, I'm supposed to grab the type string off of the function. So here it's saying that, okay, this doesn't match the first overload because the first overload is it's an action creator and you're passing in a string, so that can't be true. But the second overload, which should be legitimate, is really the error here. Okay, I think I sort of maybe see what the issue is. So apparently our TypeScript types say that if you call the builder and it passes in a string, we declare that the action object must be an action with that string, but it doesn't say anything about the payload type. So what if I come back here and I say, does that make things any better? Okay, that gave me a different error. Okay, so to be clear, what I just did is I tried to make this more specific. We optionally can apply the type as a literal to the generic here, and the original complaint. The original complaint here is saying, well, you said when we pass in a string that the action object should have a TypeScript enforced literal for the type field, but what you're passing in is just a general string, not the literal text add to do at the type level. So if I try applying passing in the literal string as a type. That fixes the first TypeScript issue. What is the second issue here? Add to dereducer. It's not some primitive type. Case reducer. Oh, that's why. Ah, okay. So that didn't help. Yeah, this is always fun. So when you just pass in an empty array, it's like TypeScript's like, yeah, it's an array, but you never told me what this array contains. So I'm going to call it an array of never. So I forgot you actually have to cast that. And now that works. Okay, do I still need this up here? Yes. Okay. And I need the same thing over here. Okay, so I think I've convinced TypeScript that this function is legal. So let's replace this and go through the rest of the file. And what do you mean? It implicitly has an any type. Oh. Oh, this is lovely. Okay. So Redux Toolkit uses Emmer, and we're trying to and by default the tests are running in development mode, and this is trying to ensure that we run this specific test in production mode. So we've got a describe block that changes the node end flag and then does a runtime import. And the problem is when you do this, TypeScript doesn't follow TypeScript types through the require statement. So it has no idea what createReducer is. It thinks it's an any, therefore it thinks that argument is an any. Okay. All right. Conveniently, I've already got a TypeScript type inferred for that. So okay, so let's convince TypeScript that what I'm doing here is legal. And replace this. Okay, so we've got those fixed. Okay, we have. Let's run this, and I'm betting well, actually no, these are going to get TypeScript compiled and fail. Okay, let's go ahead and fix up these tests too. It's 250, so my original plan was for this stream to be about 2 hours long. So let's see if we can get these tests working really fast and then call it a day for the stream. Okay, so the test originally was warns about object notation deprecation. And actually, we actually just want to TS ignore these because that isn't legal to do, and we want those to throw anyway. Thinking. Okay, so what this was originally doing was it was looking for log output, but I'm no longer actually logging anything. I'm throwing an error. So what I actually need to do to make this work is I need to move this into a function. And this needs to be has been removed. Okay, so the idea is we're gonna put this line of code should actually throw an error as soon as it runs because we're doing the check in the body of createReducer. So I'm going to wrap it in a function, pass it to expect, which I think should call it, and and then the expectation is as soon as this function runs, it calls createReducer, that throws an error, and this explodes. So then we need to do. Why do I have this 2 different times? Oh, right, because I'm trying to verify that it only throws once. So I would expect that if I run this again, and I've got that flag inside of it that tries to make sure we only throw the error one time, it won't happen the second time. And I guess I actually kind of want to do the same thing down here. Although, now that we're doing errors, I'm not sure what the right behavior is in production. I would prefer not to ship the extra few bytes for the error message to production. So yeah, let's leave it like this. Okay, what other TypeScript errors do we have going on down here? I think the point of this one is we don't care about the reducer itself. We just care about the initial state. Same here. Pass in dummy functions. Let's see, where's the right here. Let's see. This is all obsolete. Yeah, that entire thing goes away. Okay, I see no more red squigglies. Let's run this and see what happens. Okay. All right, so we have 2 errors, and they both have to do with the error throwing behavior that we just messed with. Which test was that from? Okay, the development build. At line 86. Okay. So we no longer have those arguments be available anyway. So shouldn't have been production. Should have come in here. Okay, what is going on? Okay, so both these tests failed. They're both they both failed because it doesn't like we actually hit the line that throws the error. No names, not production. What happens if we remove this check and just always do that? Nope. Nope. Oh, okay. That's an improvement. So the first time around in a development build, it failed because we did not throw the error at all, and then it went to the next line of code and crashed. Here, the development build did throw the error. It just did not throw the error. Yeah. Oh, right. Because I changed the test. The test was originally asserting that we're only throwing the error once, and I literally just changed it to always throw the error. Actually, now that I think about it, oh, I know why this failed a minute ago. Having the check to only throw the error once did work, and it did only throw that error once, and that's why but the problem is that the test here is calling that function twice. So it was correctly throwing the error the first time, that check passed, and then the second time we did not throw the removal warning, and therefore in development we went to the next line of code which actually assumed it was a function and tried to call it. So the change that I made inside createReducer the first time worked correctly. Really, the problem is that the test expectation was a mismatch. You know what? I think it's probably better to actually have this be throwing every time. So let's remove. Let's do that. Let's assert that. Let's assert that it really does do this every time. And the production build behavior. You know what the production behavior is? It will crash, like legitimately crash, because the thing that you're passing in is an object and not a function. But we're not going to give the useful error message in production because that saves a few bytes. So we've warned you in development. If you try to ship that to production and it crashes, it's your fault. Yay, we're green. Cool. And right exactly at 3 o'clock. Okay, there. So now I feel like I actually accomplished something useful in the last hour. Okay, so this is a good place to wrap things up. So actually, hang on. You know what? We got this far. I'm gonna hang on for another 5-10 minutes. Let's see if we can get createSlice working real fast. Let's look at the createSlice tests. How bad are those? Okay, only a handful of red squigglies. Hopefully that's a good sign. Um, the producers. Same thing. And let's see. Oh, deprecation. Okay. I should actually look at what the Oh no, did I please tell me I didn't leave a dot only in I left a dot only in here. That's probably been sitting there on the master branch ever since I shipped 1.9. Oops. That's brilliant. I really need to turn on a rule that won't let us commit those. Okay, so we actually need to fix up this test in the same way. Um, and we're going to call it the same thing. Um, backing up. That's why we had those. Okay, change that. TS ignore that. Well, I mean, if we're throwing an error, there's no point in console logging. A comment from chat, warning one time and throwing every time seems correct. I don't think there's any point in warning. Like warning in 1.9 made sense because we weren't trying to crash the application, and the object notation was still legal. We're just trying to let you know it's deprecated. And in 2.0, it's gone. So your application will crash if you try to use it in production. So throwing that error every time in development makes sense to me at this point. Um, okay, what is this test actually doing? We need to wrap that. Um, Actually, maybe it's the other way around. So createSlice is a little trickier. Lens did some magic in RTK 1.8 to where it does not actually make the reducer function until you try to access it. And this actually improves the behavior because it allows for circular imports to work with createSlice without breaking things. So this line right here shouldn't actually make the reducer function. It should be this one here. Um, okay. Uh, oh, fine. What was the actual error message? Okay, we can remove console stuff. Uh, here right now. And we're going to do the same thing down here. And in production, what did I do over here? Does not warn in production. Crashes in production. And no TypeScript errors. And let's see what happens. Okay, so the two tests that I modified are exploding. That's not what I was hoping to see. Okay, what is different about createSlice? We still have, okay, we have the warning notation stuff in there. One more time. Hopefully, just one more time. Okay, one of those two worked. Okay. I know what's happening. So the test said that I expect that this is going to crash in a production build. And it's not, because with createReducer, there's only one thing you can do, is you're defining here are the set of actions that this reducer can handle. In createSlice, there's two things you can do. Use the reducers field to define the new actions, and use the extraDucers field to define here's the other things that we know how to handle. Inside createReducer, as soon as we get past this line, we're trying to run this function, except if it's not a function, it explodes. And in here, let's see. And in here, we get past the extraReducer stuff, and there was nothing there. Let's see. So if it comes in here, it's an object. What happens if I go back here? No, because that would actually work, and we don't want it to work. Like, I would actually kind of like this to explode. You know what? I'm gonna, in the interest of not keeping everybody here indefinitely, those folks who are still actually watching me, let's wrap it up here. I'll leave a to-do note to behavior here. Okay, let's see if that at least passes. Okay. And we've still got the describe only there. Let's make sure all the rest of the tests are actually passing. Like, we haven't changed createSlice else recently, so I wouldn't expect anything else to be failing. But okay, cool. All right. So let's stage all that. It. Pull request. Did I actually push that? No. Also helps if I actually push the branch. And now the annoying part is because master is a default and this needs to target the V2, I'm going to have to remember to change it to target V2 every time. Let's see. Reducers. I can type. Okay, there we go. I actually managed to accomplish some kind of forward progress on the 2.0 stuff today. All right, we're past 3 o'clock Eastern, and surprisingly, we still have 10-ish people. Yeah, so let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Does anyone have any final questions or comments before I go ahead and close down the stream? Going once. Going twice. I suppose the better question is anyone actually still listening to me 2 hours later? Okay, at least one person is still paying attention. All right, well, there you go. As usual, it was a little bit scatterbrained, not quite as coherent as I would have liked it, but hopefully it was at least halfway interesting and informative, and also kind of gives you a sense of what I refer to as like real maintainer work actually consists of. Like, we spend a lot of time answering questions, but in terms of actually making code changes, like a lot of our time is spent fiddling with build configurations and tests and thinking about TypeScript types, even more than just like actually building new features and functionality. It's not what I would refer to as glamorous at all, but this is a lot of what we do as maintainers. So I will try to go ahead and put RTK 2.0 alpha.0 out here in the next like hour or two if I can figure out why the publishing process actually failed. And then we'll try and get things sorted out from there. So honestly, I expect 2.0 is going to take us months of work, not necessarily because we'll be working the whole time, but because like I can't imagine when we would ever get around to having an RTK 3.0. And that means that anything that we can think of that might be a breaking change in any way really needs to go into this release. And that inevitably means we're going to like keep adding more and more things to it, because this is kind of like, in a sense, only our one and only chance to do this for a while. So we're going to be very, very cautious in when we actually finally hit the button. So probably not for several months. Plus, there's the question of when do we actually have time and energy and interest to, spend an evening or a weekend working on these things. So, as always, if anyone's actually interested in helping out, we would be happy to have folks assist us. Not expecting that, but let us know. Okay, gonna call it here. Thank you for the folks that actually showed up and hung around. And if you got any more questions, ping us on Twitter or React2Flux or GitHub. Thanks.